talked a little bit about the differences between being young and being older when you're diagnosed. What about the differences between men and women? Because we all know that men communicate very differently than we do. And also the other piece to that is, in general, women tend to reach out to their support people much more than men do. Men tend to be more activity driven. So for a man, I would assume, when they no longer can play golf with the guys or bike ride with the guys, where does that leave them? Whereas I can go to lunch with my friends. I can still do that, or they can come here and have lunch with me if I'm not feeling well. So can you speak a little bit to that, the differences? Either one. Tina, you want to continue what you
the
were
loss
saying?
of community. I mean, listen, you have it exactly right. That loss of community, and from what I've witnessed, man go through, is that because his inability to ride a bike, he can't do his mountain bike riding or his cycling anymore. And that was his sense of community. That's how he got together with other people. And so that's a loss, unable to do that. So I've tried to encourage him, listen, now that you're on disability and there's a bit of a semi-retired lifestyle, what do you think about in the community going to the local country club with other people that are retired? You know, and unfortunately that suggestion fell on deaf ears, but
well, you know, I mean, that's a really good point. I remember I was very physically active before. When I first became disabled, I was 40, and I was in extremely good shape when that happened, and I was very physically active. And when that was gone suddenly, it was really hard because my mindset went to having this tape play in my head of all the things I couldn't do anymore. Oh, I'm never going to do that. Oh, I can't do that. Oh, that's too hard for me, this and that. And I had to actually force myself to, I'll never forget this. It's very corny, but I put one of those dry erase boards on my refrigerator, and I would write down every day. I'd force myself to think of something I could still do. You know, read a book. I can cook still. I can have lunch with friends. I had to force myself to do that because it was so depressing. It's beyond depression. It's almost, which we're going to get into that in a minute, that question. It was almost on the verge of not necessarily suicide, but definitely feeling that my life was done. Like, I'm 40. I can't go another 40 years like this, doing nothing. You know, that's what it felt like. Like I'd have no purpose, no value, nothing. And so I can see where its sense of community and its identity, which we've touched on a little bit, re-identifying yourself, coming up with a new identity for who you are. And I would think, again, gender, but also age comes to mind with that question as well, because when you're young, you don't have an identity yet. You're, as Lauren said, you're right at the very beginning of figuring that out. Whereas when you're older, it's all loss. You know, it's all the things you can't do anymore. There is a question in there somewhere, but I don't know if there's a way to help people get to that point. If there's a different approach for men and women, if you were counseling.
I think gratitude plays into it.
Good point.
And men are not as open to thinking about gratitude because frankly, they're not as, you know, they're a little more self-centered usually. But I know that's a really sexist thing to say, but I'm just saying that when I've proposed it to female clients versus male clients, I get a completely different response, right? So I think the reason I think gratitude is important is that gratitude helps the person see that they still have, that despite all the loss, they still have things to be thankful for, things that they can find purpose in, people they can find purpose in. And so if someone starts a gratitude journal, for instance, even if it's one, and I've explained it to people by saying it doesn't have to be any grand pronouncement, but even the tiniest thing, like you're breathing fresh air and it's a beautiful day, that's something to be grateful for, right? A nice meal that either you or somebody prepared for you, whatever it is, it can get the person to shift their thinking from all the things they're not happy about and all the things they've lost to what they are, what they still have, you know.
That's a really good point.
It is. It's a change of perspective too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Instead of looking in, you're looking out at the world around you more than just what you're suffering through, you know, that day. I mentioned suicide because there's been many studies talking about the that chronically ill populations tend to at least play with suicide ideation, even if they don't attempt suicide, but it's on their minds quite a bit. So I guess the question's kind of two-part. Do you treat someone who's chronically ill and feeling like their life is over differently than you would, say, a healthy person who, for whatever reason, feels that way? Is the treatment the same, the approach?
I mean, I feel like with suicidal ideation, the treatment would be similar. I think that it's important to be able to sit as a mental health professional. We're trained to be able to sit with that and to talk about, well, how would you do that? What if you what are some of the thoughts you're having? Is it, I wish I was never born. I wish I was, this wasn't the problem for me because it's not for other people. And I think it's really important to have a space, and we talk about like a non-judgmental space where people on both sides can talk about their suicidal ideation, because I think that's something that people don't bring up with other people because they're afraid that it's going to induce fear in other people, or an overreaction. So I think bringing it into the counseling session and being open as a therapist to talk about it, and not we're trained not to clam up with it, and to really dive deep into that is really important. And people tend to clients feel relieved after. Like, oh,
Because for most people, I would imagine that it's really not that they want to die. It's that they just want where they are to change. They want something to change and shift. And in the case of a chronically ill person, they don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, you know, which again, kind of goes back to the depression, really, doesn't it? It kind of, I don't think you could get to that place with suicide ideation if you're not already suffering from depression, right? I would think.
Well, yes, but as we're seeing, you know, in our field, the numbers, that's why Tina's so busy in her, you know, the numbers of children and adolescents who are experiencing chronic suicidal thoughts, the numbers have probably tripled, I would say.
Since COVID? Is that?
I think even before, even before COVID, I think it's worse now, but so I think, and not all of them have been depressed for a long time, and certainly not all of them have a chronic illness. But I think, especially for young people who don't have the tools to cope with or skills to deal with adverse circumstances, that's the go-to thought. You know, if I weren't around, nobody would miss me. everybody would be better off without me. That's just kind of the go-to thinking, and not all of them are clinically depressed. It may become that later on, but
So it may be situational
could be
as a result of
situational.
dealing with whatever limitations they have. So how do we find value in our lives in spite of our limitations? And how do we help those around us find that value? When people write to me, and it is more frequently younger people, again, because they don't realize they can come around the other side of it, but they'll write and they'll say, I can't do anything. And I'll say, well, you're doing something, you're typing on your computer, there are things you can. They'll say, no, you don't understand, I can't do anything. They'll write it in big block letters across their email. And the fact that they don't just see it as limitations to their life, they see it as a big wall coming down on their life that they can't get around. So how do we help people see past that? And how do we do that for ourselves?
Well, I'm just thinking from our personal lives. Our mother suffered with a chronic illness in rheumatoid arthritis. She had the philosophy that unless she was, literally feeling like she was dying on a given day, she always forced herself to get out of bed and get dressed. In other words, she didn't hang around in her pajamas where we would make her feel like a sick person or an ill person, right? So I think that for somebody like that, if it can be pointed out to them, what are your habits? Do you get out of bed every morning and get dressed? Or do you, if you're feeling achy and not feeling great, do you lounge in your pajamas on that day? And finding out like what are their habits? Do their habits reinforce their depression, or do their habits help to cope with their depression?
Well, it reinforced their depression and also reinforced their physical limitations.
Well, true.
Because I personally find that if I don't feel good, and obviously, if I'm having episodes where I'm passing out when I stand up, no, that's not the day to move around. But if I'm just generally not feeling so great, if I sit and not do anything, all I think about is every ache and pain and every physical feeling that I have. Whereas, as you said, if you get up, you get dressed, you start moving, you read a book, you listen to music, whatever it is that takes you out of yourself, can physically reinforce the good parts of your day, as opposed to, and I don't think that's chronic toxic positivity at all. I think those are real things you can do.
And I think I'll bring up that you talk about finding value in life. When I've worked with different clients who have had medical complications, is that it's amazing having a pet. Having it over COVID, there was a lot of discussion around people, the loneliness and pets. But I know that Lori's daughter has a lovely dog, and my husband and I have a dog as well. And
Lauren does too. Lauren has a Labradoodle, right?
A Labradoodle, great. And I think that letting people know that you're wanted by them.
Yes, and needed.
Right. And that you do things with them, whether that's cuddling, whether that's feeding them, there gives some purpose to life.
That's
them.
right.
Definitely.
That's a really good point. And I think you have to really look for those opportunities for purpose. I mean, I know for Lauren and I, we both got involved with Dinet for that reason. I mean, we both came to Dinet as members, as just people with dysautonomia learning more, and then came to believe in its mission and volunteer our services. That was a lifesaver for me early on. because,
Mhm.
you know, as you said, Tina, before with Matt, you know, adjusting to this kind of retirement world, but nobody else is retired. I mean, when I was
Of his
50,
age, yeah.
everyone else, right, was still working. So
Mhm.
there wasn't, it wasn't the same. It was, I had to reach out and find a new community, which is what Dinet provided for me. Don't you agree, Lauren? Wasn't that part of your seeking value, and because you couldn't work at the time?
100%. I think I was in high school still when I found Dinet. And I was looking for a way to help people. I had extra time when I didn't feel good that I wanted to be doing something, have that feeling of value and purpose. And it really helped my mindset. Not to say it was perfect after that,
Right.
but it definitely helped to feel like I was making a difference or helping people who were going through the same thing. That really was a big deal.
And that you weren't alone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You know.
Because even, 10 years ago, in my area, at least, nobody heard of POTS.
Right.
I remember one time I was getting a sleep study and the nurse was putting, I don't know what you call them, the electrodes or whatever on me. And she said, "Oh my gosh, I think the girl next door is having a sleep study and she has POTS too." And I got all excited because it's such a rare thing. Or my mom would be in a grocery store and she'd hear one mom talking about POTS and she'd get like whiplash because
Right.
just nobody heard about it. So that sense of community and other people knowing what you're going through, that really helped you make you feel less alone, which is a big part of chronic illness in general.
It is.
Yes.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's,
I think that's what I found pretty remarkable with finding Lori and Lori's family and Ellen's. Part of that is that not feeling alone with this. Be relocated out to this area and farther away from family. So it was just wonderful to be embraced by Lori's family and someone else that knew what it was like to have somebody with this chronic illness.
Yeah.
Well, and because, another part of it for a lot of people, all of us on the panel are very fortunate in that we have had a sense of community and we've had family that believed us, that trusted us, that supported us. For a lot of people, they're not believed. We're speaking right now. A few of the forum administrators brought me a woman who was put in a psych unit because they didn't believe that they thought she was having panic attacks. And the fact that she was insisting something was wrong with her, they thought that she was like, I don't know what they were diagnosing her as, but they did not believe that any of these symptoms were physical symptoms, because they did one simple test and she passed that test. So therefore they stamped it as a mental health issue. And the more they did that, the more she fought back. And then, of course, what happens over time, you do start to sound unhinged. Saying, no, you don't understand. There's something, look, it's happening again.
Right.
And then you question yourself.
Exactly. You don't even believe yourself anymore.
Right.
And I don't know. I don't think anyone can get through chronic illness without some support system somewhere. I really don't believe that you can. It can't be done with just you. And of course, this woman feels completely vindicated because she finally failed. She said, she actually wrote, "I've never been so happy to find out I have an incurable illness as I am now." Because her husband didn't believe her mother didn't believe her. No one believed that she was actually physically ill. And that happens, unfortunately, that happens quite a bit with invisible illnesses in general, because you can't, I mean, look at Lauren's beautiful. She doesn't look like there's anything at all wrong with her. She looks perfectly healthy. I mean, so it's hard to look at her and think, boy, some days she can't sit up. She can't stand up from a sitting position. I mean, that's and many other things. Like it's not, it's hard for people to understand that.
Yeah.
It is. And for a man, like in Matt's case, also, I think that a traumatic brain injury, however minor, can also be very hard for other people to understand.
Yes.
Because as he experienced on the job, you know, people can be downright cruel about it because they can't see it.
Right.
So, you know, they become sort of abusive which is what happened to him. But I also think chronic illness of any kind in general, one of the reasons I think it's harder for men is because men are not used to talking about any of their difficulties, not with other men, or maybe if they're going to a therapist and it's a female therapist, they will. But in terms of community, they can't bring themselves to really be vulnerable like that, the way I think many women can.
Mhm.
So at least there's a little bit more of a sense of, you know, getting help or, you know, not being so alone kind of a
Right.
thing.
I agree. So
But-
what now, Tina, when you said before about the irritability and whether that's a symptom, a side effect of the medication, a symptom, you know, we go through similar things with brain fog, where there are days where I can't think of words for anything. It's just gone to me. And I'll, you know, I sit there and I'll say to my husband, you know, the things you put on your feet before you put your shoes on, you know, socks, that's it. You know, you would think that I was coming up with some, you know, complicated medical term, and it's just something I've said, you know, a million times in my life. But so that alone is very frustrating and can cause extreme feelings of irritability and annoyance, because you're annoyed with yourself that you can't.
Well, it affects your self-esteem too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Your confidence in yourself.
That's right. And that's a hard thing anyway. I mean, that's, you know, as you age or when you're young, because you're still establishing yourself, and when you're older, because your self-esteem, the way you viewed yourself before, changes as you get older. I guess I'm thinking it's hard to support somebody who's aggravated all the time, who's frustrated all the time, who's constantly feeling irritable. It's hard to be a good support to a person who's doing that. Yet at the same time, if you're the person feeling that, where do you go with it?
I can say as the caregiver that there are times that I will have to, you know, say to her that, you know, this isn't just you. This isn't, you're not the only one. I'm not the one experiencing it. I know that. However, I'm the one who bears the brunt of your frustration and irritability. And I'm human, and there are some days that I am not as effective in dealing with it as others.
Right.
And I think it's important, like as a caregiver, to put that out there. Like, I understand that you're frustrated. I get it. I can't imagine what it's like for you, but I do know what it's like for me, and it's frustrating for me too. And it's depressing for me too, you know. So
I think definitely that piece of we talk a lot about intention versus impact. I think that I let Matt know, I know it's not your intention to be mean to me when you're irritable and when you're frustrated. But I want you to know the impact it has on me, that when you're irritable and grunting about everything, that may make me feel anxious, hearing this constant grunting, for instance, that he tends
That's
to.
a really good point.
Yeah.
That's a very good point, because I think that when you have had a chronic illness, Lauren and I have talked about this quite a bit too, it's very easy. The medical community is very big on putting you in that category of patient, you know, not seeing the whole of you, the other
Right.
aspects of your life, just patient with a list of medical issues and a list of treatments. And if you're not careful, it's very easy for you to fall into that trap and view yourself as a patient, identifying yourself. We've talked about this, Lori, with Jessica, that she still identifies herself to a large degree as a cancer patient, but she's been cancer free for how many years is it now? You
Right,
know,
but really, she should identify herself as someone who she does now have have chronic illnesses as a
absolutely.
result of that. She's not a
That's
cancer
right.
patient
That's right.
anymore, but she does have things that she has to deal with, you know.
That's right. She has chronic illnesses. But I mean, it's easy to kind of fall into that trap of seeing yourself as a medical case first, and then the rest of you. And I think, how do you find value in your life and purpose in your life if you first identify yourself in your head as this patient? I am, you know, you know, I remember when I was in a car accident years ago when I was 20. For years after, I would refer to it as not the car accident. I referred to it as my car accident. When I was in my car accident, it was my thing. It was my, like a possession that I had, because I was identifying myself from that point on. It was only when I went into therapy that was pointed out to me, because I didn't even notice it. It wasn't a thing that happened to me. It was who I was. And I think that's a trap that you can fall into with chronic illness.
Yes.
Again, probably techniques to think outside yourself rather than inside would help with that, right?
And thinking about what you can do to help other people somehow, however, you know.
That goes back to gratitude.
Yeah,
which I thought was an excellent point. I mean, gratitude, you know, I mean, the thing is with chronic illness, I've actually emailed this reply to people who are very stubborn, refusing to even think, to even consider that they could have a life after. I have said to them, what is the alternative? You have to adjust. They'll say, I don't want to adjust. I don't want a new normal. I don't want a new life. You have no choice. It's here. This is what you're given. This is what you have. It might not be fair. And there's nothing wrong with grieving for yourself either. That's an important point too.
Yeah.
I think you have to go through the stage of really grieving. You have to, or you're just sucking it down.
But you know, a doctor, when Jessica was diagnosed, Dr. Pomeroy gave us some very good advice, because all of the doctors kept referring to it as a new normal for her. And I, at the time, said, I don't want a new normal. She was perfect the way she was. There was nothing wrong with her. I want to keep that. I want to keep. And he looked at me and he said, the sooner that you can accept that she will be a different person from this day forward, the better off she will be.
That's right.
And that was, I have to admit, that was a very hard pill to swallow. So to speak. It really was.
Right.
Because of course, no parent or partner wants to ever accept that a person's going to be different. But the truth of the matter is, the only way that you can grieve that loss and then move forward is to accept that part of it. That there is going to be a new normal. There is.
I think it actually, I've often thought this over the years. Kubler-Ross's book about the 5 stages, I think it is, of death, of grieving a death, or of dying, actually. She writes it from the perspective of dying. But I think those stages really apply to a lot of different losses.
Oh, definitely. It's loss.
Because being angry, you have to go through the angry stage. Why How many times, Lori, have I said to you about a relative, like, she's useless. Why didn't this happen to her? She wouldn't even care if this happened to her. She never moves. She doesn't do anything. I mean,
Yeah.
I've wished this on many people, I'm embarrassed to say, over the years. And, I think anger and grief, you have to come to a point of acceptance for sure.
And I think there's a long-term grief that happens because just with Jess and Matt, there is this this constant complications from the radiation.
Yes.
Right.
For Jessica too.
Right. So for both of them, there is this loss that they're losing that continually happens. For Jess, I know it's one of the things is around our hearing. For my husband Matt, he can't write anymore. So, and these are things that have happened over time. So there's a long-term grief.
Yeah, there's cumulative losses. And it's like you're grieving all the time for the next thing that can happen.
Well, and that is very similar also to people with dysautonomia, because most people with dysautonomia, it's a secondary illness. It's a disorder that happens as the result of another illness that they're dealing with, whether it's EDS, Parkinson's, diabetes, spine issues, which, which I've had for forever. There's many different MS. You can develop dysautonomia and autonomic dysfunction as a secondary layer to what the core thing is. So even though it's not, dysautonomia by itself is not considered a
can it be primary for some people though? Like in Lauren's case, was it? It is, yeah. But that's more unusual, probably.
Well, not for POTS. For POTS specifically, it because it can be caused by a virus, a flu.
Oh, okay.
We're seeing a lot of post-COVID POTS people.
Yeah.
Right. Surgery, sometimes it can set it off, which is why for a lot of people, it is something that is very long-term, that has many different stages to it, because it, as the primary illness becomes worse, so does the dysautonomia. So there's more limitations that come and go, over time. And it does feel sometimes as a patient that you just start to adapt and learn to live with the symptoms you had, and then boom, there's something new, because it affects your digestion. Lauren's gone through all sorts of things recently with digestion and esophagus, right?
Yeah, it is forever changing.
So one last question, and then we can wrap up. Are there things that people as caregivers struggle with the most, that we as people who live with chronic illness can do a better job of developing empathy, so that it's more of a partnership than a caregiver patient situation? So it's more like making adaptations and adjustments and communication, so you're going forward together, whether it's mother, child, or partner.
Yeah, I think that, because sometimes it's true, I can sometimes feel like I'm in a parent role in the marriage. So I think that the communication is critical, and to sit down when you're both calm, not amiss when someone's irritable or frustrated. Sit when you're both calm and come up with and talk about what would be some things that would help you through your day. Maybe for list making, so you can do tasks and stay on top of tasks, and then you don't have to hear from me, did you do this, did you do that? And then I'm not feeling in the parent role, and you're not feeling in a kid role,
right?
So kind of really talking openly and communicating about that. And there was something else that'll come back to me, but I'll pitch it back to Lori.
Okay. What do you think, Laura?
Yeah, I wish, I guess I wish that there was a little bit more of that. You know, a little bit of the empathy coming this way. I've gotten a little bit better about not tolerating when there's not any empathy coming my way. The other day was an example where the word retrieval that you were talking about, she has that a lot.
Right.
And so she was frustrated because she couldn't remember the name of something. And I was giving clues, and I was, and it wasn't working. The clues weren't working. And she was getting more and more the frustration was coming at me.
Right.
And we were in the car, we were on our way to do something she wanted to do with the dogs. And I felt like I was just being sort of disrespected because
Mhm.
she was
Right.
frustrated with herself. And finally I said, you know what? This is my day off. I didn't especially want to do this. I was doing it for you. And I understand that you're frustrated. I understand, but it's also frustrating for me when I'm trying to help and I'm just getting the brunt of it.
Right.
And I just said, I'm not going to do this. And I turned the car around and I came home.
That was good.
And I actually, what I wanted to do was to pull over and let her out on the side of the road, but I didn't do that. But I turned the car around and I came home, and I did say to her once, and I also didn't apologize. And usually when there's an episode like that, I end up apologizing that it happened, not necessarily that I'm wrong for feeling the way I feel, but because I feel so bad for her, I will
Right.
end up apologizing, but I didn't. And before bedtime, she apologized to me,
Which is good.
which
Right.
was good. So I'm getting better at sort of having a boundary that this is what I'll tolerate and this is what I won't.
Mhm.
And,
Right. So again, we're back to communication
Yeah.
on both
on
parts.
both sides.
Because it probably would have gone a long way with you in that instance if she, as the chronically ill person, had said, I'm sorry, Mom, but I'm getting really frustrated that I
Right.
can't think of this word. Because
And I
then,
know it's
you
not
can
your
leave it at
fault.
that. Right.
Mhm.
So
And I know
we
you're
have
trying to
be
help.
better. Yeah.
Mhm.
Because it
Mhm.
doesn't do, just speaking for myself, it doesn't do me any favors. I hate the feeling that other people feel sorry for me.
Yeah.
Right.
I hate that. I
Mhm.
hate feeling like
I'm sure that's
somebody's,
yep.
looking at me and going, oh, what a shame.
Right.
Yeah.
That's such a
Right.
shame. you know? Because I don't want that. I want to be valuable and I want to have
Mhm.
purpose, and I don't want to be seen as a child. I mean,
Mhm.
Or
I've
as
gotten mad at, I'm sorry.
or as like weak or damaged. You
Right.
don't
Yeah,
wanna,
yeah.
yeah.
That's right. Right. I mean, I've gotten mad at Lori because
Mhm.
many times because she
Yeah,
follows me around and says,
I get
you
it from all
shouldn't be doing
sides.
this.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be doing this. It's
Right,
too
right.
much for you. Sit down. You shouldn't do this. And I want to keep doing things for as long as I can power through and
Right.
do.
Mhm.
And that's my way of coping. And I think I think I don't know if there's other ways other than the things we already talked about to helping a chronically ill person develop that sense for themselves of wanting, even before they get to having value, wanting value or seeing the value they do have and purpose that may be different than what they thought. But I don't know if there's
Mhm.
anything else either one of you want to add to that.
I think one of the things I was thinking about before that I wanted to add on to is for caregivers out there and for non-caregivers, for people with dysautonomia and POTS, is that it's important to take self-care. That for
Mhm.
it's okay for caregivers to do something for themselves.
Mhm.
It's whatever that might be. It again, going back to some of the gratitude stuff, it could be just simply walking outside and smelling your flowers. I mean, do
Mhm.
something for yourself that fuels yourself, and that's okay to do that. And because you do that for yourselves, it allows you to be there for, I don't know if you've call it patient
The
or
person,
a
right.
For somebody
Yeah,
else, yeah.
right, for
Right.
somebody else. Yeah.
Mhm.
Right, that's a good point. It's
Mhm.
also a good point for the person with
Mm.
chronic illness to purposefully do things that nurture their soul and their mental health.
Yeah.
Because I think there's so much focus and concentration on our physical bodies that
Mhm.
frequently we forget that piece, whether it's, again, we come back to people thinking I can't do anything. Well, we're not talking about lifting weights when we
Mhm.
say movement. It can be whatever it is. If all you can do is this, do that, and then do it, 10 times tomorrow. See how far you can get with each arm. I mean, anything that you can do that takes you out of just focusing on, your physical body, finding things that you read that are motivational, finding people to talk to, whatever it is, I think is a really important point, because we have to focus on our mental health too, and most of us do not.
Right.
I know that Tina does work. It's I think too much for this platform right now, but you do work with soul collage, for instance.
Mhm.
And that probably would be a great technique for people who are struggling with chronic illness to work on
Yes.
something that fills their
Is that something you create?
Yeah, and it's something you can do on your own. You don't need someone to facilitate it. It's simply
Mhm.
just taking a 5x7 card, taking some images out that could reflect from magazines or from online that could reflect maybe something that you are hoping to feel that you don't yet
Mhm.
feel,
Right.
or could be exactly how you're feeling if you are feeling
Mhm.
really depressed or anxious. But I think certainly that type of creative arts, I do use a lot of that
Mhm.
with my clients, yes.
Well, that's great. I mean, if you have any, I don't know, websites or things like that for self-help that you can shoot my way, I'll put them up on our site and let people know.
Yeah.
I know that we kind of have to bring this to an end, but I just wanted to thank you both again for doing this. I think it's, it's great for you to share your expertise, but it's also very brave for you to share what you both go through as caregivers.
Mm.
And even if we don't always seem like we appreciate it, we do. We
More
keep
than
doing
you
what we
can
can,
know.
Yes, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. And for anybody watching this, we will have both of their full bios are available on our Dinet.org site. And again, encourage you all to look at our YouTube channel. Lauren has created a lot of original videos that help with symptom management and a lot of the issues that we've talked about here. And obviously, or I would hope, that if you are feeling terribly depressed and you can't get out of it on your own, or you are thinking that your life is meaningless or you're lost, please seek help from someone, anyone that you can talk to that can help you get out of that, so that you
If
don't
I
go
could put a
down that
pin
rabbit
note
hole.
there, Ellen, for the 988 number,
Yeah.
which is throughout the United States, I believe, right, Lori?
Mhm.
The
Yes.
988 number,
988 for suicide prevention.
suicide, or for that would be important for
Okay,
people to
we'll
have.
put that, we'll post that as well. Thank you. All right, well, thank you both, ladies. I'll see you
You're
both
welcome.
soon.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Certainly.